Can I say I'm excited to be here for a couple of reasons. One, it's Geelong, and I think Geelong's pretty special. It has had an amazing history, it's had its ups and downs, and certainly, although I'm based in the west, we certainly get a lot of news out of the east, and certainly the challenges that you've had, particularly when it comes to employment and local economic development, even the news that you've heard in the last 24 hours. Yet again, another loss out of the region. But this is a place that's known good times, bad times. This is a place that's had major interface with its local agricultural and rural type communities. It's a city, but in many ways it's still a country town. It has the best and the worst of kind of like each of those features. But it is a place that was created by people. And it started before we even invented most levels of government, when people just saw opportunity, came, held hands with each other and started to kind of like achieve things. And I suppose to me that's where I'm coming from today. I'm actually not really interested any longer in what a government can do. I'm interested in what community can do. Because to me it is the most important kind of like social bit of fabric that we actually have. And so I'm interested in coming from that perspective today to start sharing and talking about the power, the contribution, the dynamics of how communities keep evolving and reimagining themselves. And really the history of this place is a great example of it. I just love some of these 100-year postcards that really just show just where we've actually come from, both socially and kind of like economically and whatever. The contribution that port, industry, agriculture and other things have actually had and the way they've implemented on this place. I also need to say I still think this is one of the most imaginative bit of public art that I know anywhere. I discovered that, I don't know, it must be 15, 16, I don't know how old it is, but I always associate this type of creativity, and particularly the thought that went behind, how do we have a sense of place through where we've come from? How do we do that in interesting ways? I'm also very much aware that you have had some very impressive local-based organisations here, the G21 initiative that you've well known nationally for. I also think for your Lens. Lens groups are a particular Victorian creation, but there have been versions across the country, and certainly the one here in Geelong has a lot of national accolades. It's got a lot of respect, and I particularly want to salute the organisers from that today for this event, but really for the contribution you've made over the last 13 years in terms of really bringing that spotlight on this whole area of education, learning, employment, and what we can actually do. And certainly as I looked at your website and I just took out some of the phrases out of that, it very much captures what we're on about. And I suppose what I'm particularly interested in, you know, that fifth line up from the bottom, encouraging community participation. I'm one of those people who think, unfortunately, if you listen to some of our politicians, you think we live in an economy. But we don't actually, we actually live in community. And to me, having a healthy community is one side of the coin of a healthy economy. The two are interdependent. And yet it's so easy to keep always focusing on how do we stimulate economic life. Well, really, there is an interface we've got to constantly look at. How do we stimulate healthy community life? Because the two are very much independent. And as I read your philosophy and the way that you see yourself, and particularly this group, as a broker, bringing people together, let's find creative ways to hold hands with each other, particularly in tough times when we have things like competitive tendering, a whole pile of other things that are pushing people apart and getting people to circle their wagons and whatever. It's great to have an organisation committed to partnership, to collaboration. I'm aware you've also got, what's that lovely new group you've got, Give Where You Live, and that whole focus today on collective impact. What an amazing concept that is. And again, you are really known as one of the best local examples of it. One of my best friends is a guy called Paul Bourne out of Tamarack in Canada, and Tamarack have been pioneering a lot of this stuff for 10 years, and they are very respectful of what's happening here in Geelong as a great example of how it's actually being applied within an Australian context. And even down to the local level. About 18 months ago, I worked with a group of passionate residents in Ocean Grove. Unfortunately, I come from a suburb that's called Orange Grove, and I kept confused every time I got up to speak. I kept referring to them as Orange Grove. Well, you can imagine how that upset them. This Ocean Grove place and where really a group of residents just went out and used the oldest tool we got in the toolbox of building community, it's called conversation, and started having conversations with local businesses about what helps them, what hinders them, what good ideas have you got to make this business environment a better place to function. I just wanted to acknowledge some people down there that took the initiative in that. It was just amazing to see what's come out of that. And I know other communities have used some of the tools that they've actually evolved from it. And finally, I couldn't think of a nicer place to run a workshop than in CAT territory. I'm a passionate Docker supporter, but if I lived in Victoria, I would have to be a Geelong supporter. I was brought up in Freo, I'll always be a Freo boy, and I think we have a lot in common in terms of footy clubs and communities. I think as I look at Fremantle, we're going through many of the same challenges that you are and whatever. And I know when the Dockers and the Cats are playing, there is an amazing interest in that kind of like dynamic, and we've been caught up in a couple of fairly significant football games in the last couple of years where it could go either way. I was in a taxi in Melbourne a few months ago and someone said to me, what's the difference between a wharfie and a docker? And I said, well, I'm not sure. And he said, well, at least wharfies can climb ladders. Well, that might have been the case for the first decade of our existence, but we're in there, and the fact that we gave good old Hawthorn a thrashing last weekend gives us all hope down in Freo. It's the same, the Cats are going through a great spurge as well. So again, it's good to be here, and it's good to see the thing that sport contributes in terms of community. And again, it's just one of those amazing community organisations that have pumped in what we're going to talk a bit about today, this thing called social capital. It's very important in the dynamics of any community, and let me say economy. And so we'll talk a bit about that today. The second reason I'm excited to be here is I value any time to learn. And I love this quote, in times of change, and that's exactly what you're going through, it's the learners who inherit the future. And those of us who have finished learning find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. Most of my work is in small, dying rural towns. There's a lot of them in Australia. Like 60% of our inland small towns are dying. They're losing population, they're losing their businesses, they're full of empty shops, and none of their young people want to be found dead in these places. You know what? For many of them, it's got nothing to do with their location, or their history, or their heritage, or their culture. Most of it's to do with their mindset. Most of them are still controlled and run by leaders who've had a charisma bypass at some stage in their life and who are so focused on how do we return to the good old days. And for them, let me say some of them, those good old days are back in the 60s when wool was pound a pound. Going back to those days, I can assure you. And one of the greatest needs, I think, in any community is how do we change the mindset of a community? How do we change the mindset of leaders? And the starting point for leadership, as John F. Kennedy once said, leadership and learning are inseparable. If we really want to be a leader, we've got to be a continuous learner. And that's why days like today are so valuable. That's why I think we really do need to salute the Lens Group for taking this type of initiative. Not to come and listen to me, it'll be the conversations we have around the tables that really will be the wealth of our learning today. Now, one of my heroes is this woman. She died about 6 years ago. Can anyone remember her name? I'm surprised how few remember, given the fact she was probably the most successful retailer of the 20th century. Anita Roddick. Now, I don't know if you know her history. It's just one of those great stories I've got to tell you. Her very first body shop was in the British city of Brighton in 1976. She was a 24-year-old single mum, unemployed, stone broke. A partner had left her to ride a horse across South America for 2 years. She had a dream, but she only had 15 products that she could put on a shelf. She believed in this ethical approach to consumerism. She believed in ethical approach to health products. She wanted to implement her body shop. She had to borrow £2,000 from a neighbour to kind of like kick it off. But right from day one, she was a sensation and a success story. And within that first 12 months, she turned over £3 million in that particular shop. Within 10 years, she was the second most recognised brand in the United Kingdom after Coca-Cola. And by the time she died about 6 years ago, there were body shops in 71 countries of the world. Not bad for a young, single, unemployed, stone-broke woman who just simply had a dream and wanted to go somewhere with it. But you know what? She was smart. She was streetwise. The very first body shop was between two undertakers, and she called it the Body Shop. That was an instant media success. The sense of humour of a woman starting a body shop between undertakers absolutely grabbed people's kind of like attention. Humour plays a great part in marketing. It helped when those two undertakers tried to take her to court for denigrating their profession, and she just kept pumping out more press releases about the humour of a woman running a body shop between undertakers. She was an amazing success story. And I reckon one of the books that we've all, if we're interested in this area of community and economic development, have a look at this book. You probably need to find a church fete or something to get a copy or go online. But it's called For Body and Soul, and I just still think it's one of the best, one of these books about how do you not just build a business, but how do you build community? How do you build an environment to live in that's kind of like ethical and sustainable? Some amazing thoughts in this particular book. And the one that I just want to pull out today is this quote: "You've got to be hungry for ideas, to make things happen, to see your vision made into reality." And I need to say, the people that I know who are incredible success stories, whether in community or in economic development or in business, you know what, almost to a person, they're opportunity obsessive. They're idea obsessive. They are constantly got their ear to the ground, their antennas up, and constantly they're looking at what they're doing and saying, how do I do it smarter? How do I do it better? How do I do it more effective? And to me, that's the type of mindset that leads to kind of like change, positive change, and kind of like growth. And so that lovely quote by Michael Keeling, ideas make the world go round, and people in community and business today live and die by their ideas. That's why we need workshops like this. This is why we need to carve out a couple of hours a month to kind of like gather with others. Sure, we're all going to pedal a bit faster tomorrow to catch up, but you know what? It's worth it, because exploring idea development, idea exchange, learning generally is just the important ingredient, the glue that kind of like moves a lot of development. I'm doing a lot of work currently in the Middle East. I've been there for 10 years. I spend probably 3 months a year working on youth strategies. One of the people I admire greatly is the Queen of Jordan. And whenever she speaks, she always comes out with these wonderful one-liners. And I love this one: "We are stronger when we listen, and we're smarter when we share." And to me, that is what I hope will be the experience of all of us today in terms of this workshop. I also love this one: whoever invented the first wheel was smart, whoever invented the other three was the genius, you know? And I think, again, we come to these events and we hear an idea, and rarely do I find people replicate other people's ideas. They take it in another direction. They add colour to it. They take it to another height. They take it in another direction. And so again, workshops are fantastic to leapfrog in terms of other people's experiences. So again, I'm excited to be here for that. And finally, can I say, I have really come with very little expertise in anything. I'm not an expert. I often say I'm just a bloke from a little small country town that's passionate about one thing, and it's called community. And I suppose today this will be my bias. I'm one of those people who think this is the most underrated concept to work with when it comes to development. Maoris will often greet you when you visit their marae with this statement. I won't try the Maori version. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. And as I said, you listen to the media, you listen to many politicians, and what are we hearing? It's about the economy, and whatever. It ain't about the economy. Yes, we need to worry about that. We need to think creatively. We need to constantly be having conversations about it. But you know what? Let's have the same conversations about something else too. It's called community. It's about people. How do they fit in all of this? I hear lots of groups say we are working with the people. Well, we're often doing things to people. Rarely do I find many groups working with people. And today I really want to come from that little biased position to say the greatest resource we have in any region, in any community, is the set of communities that comprise it. For 3 years now, I've spent a lot of time working in post-earthquake Christchurch. Christchurch is an amazing city, but you know what? I've discovered it's 56 villages. 56 villages comprise that particular place. And the power of the reinvention that's happening in Canterbury is not coming from the top. It's coming at the neighbourhood level. It's coming when people, through adversity, have been thrown together and discover that when you've lost everything, the one thing you do have is each other. And that creativity of coming together is creating what I think will be one of the most resilient cities we've ever seen anywhere. The infamous Margaret Thatcher. There are no such thing as community, there are only individuals and families. Well, I don't believe that, and I think we need to stand against that type of ideology. It is vital that we acknowledge this thing called community and that we talk about how we actually strengthen it. Because, you know what, it's not just in terms of adversity. If we actually treated and respected and strengthened and invigorated community prior to disaster, we would cope even better post-disaster and during the disaster. How do we get people interested in starting to hold hands? The famous social capitalist Robert Putnam reckons the most radical thing any community could do is simply get neighbour talking to neighbour. Now today I'm going to come out with a lot of those very simplistic statements, but I actually believe it. I believe that we can come out with all the most amazing plans in the world, but if we're not dealing with those simple dynamics of people, and that simple one of how do we reinvigorate street by street, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, then no city, no region can actually expect to have the type of future it actually desires. This is the person, if you haven't got into her books, no one writes better, no one, I think, demystifies what community building is like Margaret Wheatley. And one of her classic quotes is this: I work from the firm belief, whatever the issue, community is the answer. Not a government grant, not the government, not the cavalry from Canberra, community is the answer. And I'm one of those idealists that actually believe that passionately. We just never give this thing community a go. And I suppose I'm today going to be really functioning as a community enthusiast. I believe it is the greatest asset this region has, is its set of communities. Not just geographic communities, but there's a whole pile of communities of interest, online, offline, all over the place. Each of us probably belong to 10 to 20 different types of communities. How do we start to use them as an asset, as a resource, and often as a starting point? And I love this quote by Harold Fleming, the famous rural Canadian developer, who said, "The wisdom of a community always exceeds the knowledge of the experts." And again, we continue to perpetuate models in this country from top down. Somehow we have believed that we can develop this country from Melbourne and from Canberra downwards. It ain't going to happen until we start to learn that we need inside out type of development happening simultaneously. We ain't going anywhere. So many of you will get irritated by the bias that I'll come from today, but I unashamedly say I am a social capitalist and a community enthusiast. You'll just have to bear with me as I pound that message today. I love this other one by Margaret Wheatley: there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. I actually think that's the most important conversation that needs to be going on in the Geelong region. What is it that people care about? Now, most of us have an agenda we would love the community to care about, and that's how we function. How do we start with what is it that people care about? Because you know what, when I've discovered that when we start with what people really care about, there is no limit to the commitment and above all the risk that people will take to actually achieve that. But rarely do we take the time out to discover what it is that people genuinely really care about. And again, it's a major part of what we're trying to look at now, the dynamics of how do you discover the greatest asset that every community has got, and that is what people care about, the passions of people. I saw an amazing survey in Canada the other week when they asked people, why did you volunteer? And they gave people 10 options. And what amazed me is 82% of people chose one of the 10. And you know what that one-liner was? I volunteered because someone who I know asked me to do something I like doing. And I thought, you know what? We're all crying out for more volunteers, more people put up their hands. We're all complaining about volunteer burnout. We're all complaining about the same old faces having to do everything in our communities. And here's a formula to get more people. But there is a catch. You need to know what turns people on. And rarely do we take the time out in all of our busy planning from the top to think about how do we discover the passions in people's lives. I've worked with 1,600 plus communities across the globe, and I can still count on one hand how many of them have ever systematically done what I would call a community passion and skill audit. Actually dug down into the community to discover who lives in the place. I was in this depressing little rural town in South Australia a few weeks ago. I was there to try to revigorate it. Not one business left in the main street. Even the pub had closed down. I couldn't believe it. 500 people left there. No one in the audience under 60. 24 depressed souls met in a cold church hall. They were all like the folded arm brigade. Every 10 seconds I was hearing, "We tried that before and it never worked." It was so depressing. By the time we got to supper, I was about to slip my wrists. I couldn't believe people could live like this. But like in all good country towns, they always put on a great supper. So out come the scones, jam and cream, and we got stuck into that. And a farmer turns up, and he obviously thought I hadn't gone through enough masochism yet, and started to kick me more, saying, "You know, mate, you're wasting your time. This town's gone to the dogs," he said. He said, "You know, 5 years ago we had a chamber of commerce in this town." He said, 5 years ago we had a youth club functioning here." He said, "You know, even 3 years ago we actually had a table tennis kind of like club in the town. We've got nothing now. The footy club's gone, the netball club's gone, everything is gone. You're wasting your time." 10 minutes later, a young guy, probably in his late 30s, rolls up and he says, "You know, Peter, I just want to say I really love this place." He said, "I arrived here 2 years ago, and in that 2 years, no one has ever asked me to do anything in the town. No one's ever engaged me. And it's not as if I don't think I bring some gifts to this town." He said, "I bring some connections." He said, "You know what? I'm the state president of the Table Tennis Association. I could get a table tennis club going here." I said, "Hang on a moment, there's someone you need to meet." Now, in a community of 500, those two had not even had a conversation between that old farmer and this young, passionate guy. And certainly that old farmer knew nothing about the contribution this guy could bring to the town. Now, that's a community of 500. You're a community of well over, what are you up to now? 200,000, 200? You know, this region is huge. But it doesn't matter our size, it is composed of people and groups who all are community assets. And I think one of the great challenges is how do we map that kind of like resource? And not just map it like an audit where you come up with a list. No purpose in that. You map to find connection. It's about joining the dots together. So how do we map and connect all of these amazing people assets alongside the physical and the hard resource assets that we know so well? I think one, from an economic point of view, only has to reflect on this thing that's happened in the last 14 years. That's not how long the community banking movement's been alive. The first one kicked off in Victoria, I think a little place called Minyip. I was back there in that late 90s when the 4 big banks in this country decided to close down in excess of 5,000 bank branches across the country. And let me say, not one of them was closed because they were losing money. This was all about making more money for the shareholders. If we can regionalise, sell off assets, cut staff, we can return more to the shareholder. Towns reeled in terms of it. But a group of towns said, you know what, the bank is probably the most profitable business in town. And along comes this smart little group called the Bendigo Bank who says, you know what, we've got a neat little arrangement. Why don't we go into partnership together? Why don't we use this franchise model that we've discovered? And why don't you somehow find $1 million in local shareholding and get at least a pile of people willing to move at least 3 million, I think it's a lot more now, of their accounts across to us, and we have got the possibility of a business. And today, 310 communities have actually done that in Australia. Most of them started because they had lost their only bank. Many of them are now doing it because there are other benefits. Now, up the road from me is a little town called Muckenbudden. There's only 512 people in Muckenbudden, but it pulled off a community bank. And today that little bank employs 7 staff, of which 3 of them happen to be under 25, probably the only white-collar type job opportunity in that little wheat belt town. It's returned back old-fashioned banking habits. It opens on a Saturday morning. And over the 12 years of its existence, it's returned back $1.8 million to the local community. Amazing stuff happened. How did it happen? Well, ordinary people, most of whom had never been involved in that type of economic activity before, put up a little card table in front of the local co-op, encouraged their fellow community members to sign up to raise that $1 million and that $3 million in accounts that was actually required to pull it off. Probably the most exciting movement since the co-op movement of the latter part of the 19th and early 20th century. Probably the most exciting community economic development movement that country's seen. And you know what? In the last 14 years, collectively, those 300 plus little banks have returned back now close to $120 million to their local communities in terms of dividends. An amazing story that when people actually believe in something, they can actually organise to actually do it. And the most interesting thing about that economic story is that not one of them has fallen over. Not one of them has actually failed. And what I find exciting now, they move beyond that. What do we do with the profit? Oh, well, another set of footy jumpers for the footy club. It's a limit to how many footy jumpers a club needs. I'm now finding these towns are now being driven by these people. So the people down in the little town of Mount Barker came together and said, you know what, we're turning over about $150,000 profit a year. What can we do strategically with that? So they actually organised this amazing community conversation around what are the real challenges in this community. And at the top of the list came health challenges. They had a 1950s health centre full of asbestos. They had limited health services. They couldn't keep a doctor. And they said, you know what, that's how we need to challenge it. And they began to think outside the box. This is a couple of farmers, a guy who runs the news agency down there, kind of like a young mum with 3 kids in pre-primary coming together and saying, you know what, let's go to the Bendigo Bank in Bendigo and ask if we could have a loan of $1 million that we'll pay back $100,000 over the next 10 years to. And with their $1 million loan, they went to their local council and said, we've got $1 million, where's your $1 million? And with $2 million, they then went to the state and feds and leveraged another $2 million. And with their $4 million, they had built the most state-of-the-art health centre you've ever seen. Offers now an amazing set of services, and they now have 3 resident doctors in town that have responded through to that. Ordinary people getting involved in taking that community in a different direction. That's what we're talking about when we come to talk about this power of community. Now, enough of the introduction. These are the suggestions for the workshop. Is everyone happy with it? They really add up to one thing. Please feel free to intervene at any stage. Whether you've got a question, a contribution, you want a debate, let's make sure this isn't just a one-way kind of like direction. Can I particularly point out that number 3 on that list? I think we want this to be a learning conversation. I've come to the conclusion that meetings don't work any longer. What changes people are conversations. When you even think about our parliament, rarely what is debated and voted on in parliament was actually decided in the parliament. You know where most of it was decided? Over a glass of wine in some little conversation in the back alley, in the hallway, in the parliamentary dining room, where people came together and used this thing called conversation. And so I'm really keen that today we fundamentally run lots of conversations in this room around these issues and so on. I believe in that. The most productive tool for generating good ideas remains a circle of humans sitting around a table talking shop. And so that's why we've structured this workshop along that particular line. And secondly, can we use the good old storytelling thing? You know what? People do not respond to flow diagrams, to spreadsheets, to lots of data. What do they respond to? A story. And so if you've got some good stories, please feel free to be able to share it. Most of what I'll share today will be stories as opposed to concepts. And there's really only one note. I wouldn't take a lot of time writing a lot down, because if you want a copy of all the slides, they'll be available from the lens. They can be transferred to you. And also I'll be giving you handouts and referring to things, plus a series of publications in terms of it. Any questions about the structure of the day? And then a whole pile of other tools. If you just go on our website, it's probably the only thing you need to know, but it's probably on the handouts anyway. You'll notice there that we have got a whole pile of handouts that relate to what we're talking about today that you might want to find useful. And the one thing about our organisation is that we work on copyleft, not copyright, which means that you can rip off everything, put your name on it, your logo. We even used to have in there, in short, all the contents of public policy, please feel da-da-da-da. You can extract them, summarise them. We had the word steal, and the police department rang us and said it's against the law to advocate stealing. You've got to remove it from your website. So that was the only bit we had to take out. But look, it's all there. It's all downloadable. It's all there to spread the word.